my clock says 7 o'clock. So, so I promised everyone that I would start a new topic this week, but we will get back to the old topic, which was the laws of brachot, blessing. But we're gonna go a little bit into the topic of the laws of the Yamim Noraim, of the high holy days, which are coming up, and then after Sukkot, we'll get back to brachot. That will be the plan. At this point, I have a couple things to say. Well, first of all, I had a nice vacation last week. Thanks for giving me a week off. And then also, I wanted to this topic of the laws of Rosh Hashanah. When you learn through the Sefer Halacha, like the Shulchan Aruch on this subject, so they start off talking a lot about the season. So there's a lot of non-halachic matters that play into the first few chapters in most halacha svarim on the subject. So today, while there will be some discussion of law, almost all of it will be a discussion of customs that have been almost codified, that we consider them halachot, but they're not really laws, they're really customs. And the things that the customs are based on are important. So we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to go into a little bit into philosophy. So I apologize for that in advance. To some degree, I'm kind of getting revenge on Rabbi Hertzfeld because he specifically chose to give me the halacha to discuss, even though my heart wanted to do more philosophical things. But now I'm getting back at him this week by venturing a little bit into non-halachic matters, but they're important for us to understand where these customs come from and what the reasons are and so on. All right, that put aside, let's get to the meat here. I sent out my notes like I usually do. It's Yamim Noraim 1 and Yamim Noraim 2. Rabbi Melamed goes through these in two separate chapters, and then because of what I explained before, the non-halachic issues, I went off. I covered the subjects that he did, but I took them off in my own direction. So you'll have to allow me that. So first of all, we're soon going to start. Sorry, go ahead.
Where is it sourced from?
So I used the Panini Halacha as a guide to choose the topics, but then his understanding of the topics, I usually went in my own direction. So I think you'll understand what I mean as we go through this. And forgive me for misspellings and stuff. My notes were not meant to be published. They were meant to be notes. So you can follow along, but they're meant to remind me of what my thoughts were on the various subjects. And please stop me if you want to make comments, ask questions, please stop me at any point. The first, one of the psukim, one of the verses that Chazal bring in reference to these days is the pasuk of Dirshu et Hashem behimatzo, that we should literally, that means seek out God when he is to be found. And that verse is brought by Chazal to refer to the time of the Yamim Noraim, of the days of the high holy days. These are the days when God can be found. This raises what we know is, and it's based on that almost all of the customs have developed, because in our tradition, these are the days where God can be found, where we have a special relationship, a special closeness. We therefore are obligated to look into our ways, repent, improve our ways, and we can approach God and ask for forgiveness in ways that we didn't have the opportunity at other times of the year. Now, this brings up the obvious question, which is, what does that mean, that this year is a special time? Does God have times that we can reach him, whereas other times of the year we can't? Are we not supposed to repent and fix our ways all year round? I mean, the question is a very important one, and really underlies the basis of of all of the special customs that we have at this time of year. I wanted to mention an approach that speaks to me. Maybe it'll speak to you also, maybe not. But I'm going to the verse of Dirshu et Hashem b'hi matz'o, right, comes from the Isaiah, from Ishayahu, and Isaiah 57, I think it's Perek Nun Zion. And when you look at the pasuk there, I'm trying to pull up the pasuk right now on my computer. We actually see a kind of a different understanding of what Dirshu et Hashem b'hi matz'o means. And I'm trying to look it up so that I can read it for you. Just give me one more second here.
What Isaiah is it?
I'm going to tell you in 1 second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's fine. Give me 1 minute.
Sure.
I thought I had this pulled up, but I apparently closed it by mistake, so I apologize. No, it'll be in the Pnei Halacha. It will tell me exactly where it is. Just give me 1 second. Yes, it's Isaiah 55, verse 6. That's where it is. Isaiah 55, verse 6.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, what I'm going to point out here is the understanding of the Eben Ezra on this verse in Isaiah, and it will help us really. And the Eben Ezra on that verse states that what Dirshu et Hashem b'hi matz'o means is almost the opposite of what we always thought it meant. We always thought it meant that this time of year is a special time for us to do tshuva because God is closer to us and he will listen, which is one legitimate understanding of the verse. However, the Eben Ezra has a very different understanding, and that he says as follows, that this verse is being spoken to the people in Isaiah's day. Now, Isaiah was one of the prophets who prophesied during the time when the Beit HaMikdash was standing. And in fact, there was actually a great salvation. The army of Sanherib of Assyria had surrounded Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was saved in a miraculous way. And Isaiah was speaking to the Jewish people in a time before the destruction, when the destruction that occurred about 100 or so years later could have been averted. And the Eben Ezra explains that the verse Dirshu Hashem b'hi matz'o, we should search out God when he is to be found, is he is telling them, before God comes and punishes you, before the time of din, before the time when these punishments are going to come, you still have a chance. Now is the time to do teshuvah. Now is the time to repent. And the lesson for all of us in our lives is that actually what we're supposed to learn from this verse is the opposite of what we thought. There isn't a special, unique time when we're supposed to do teshuvah. But now, whatever is now, don't wait until you're suffering, God forbid, when God is punishing you for your deeds. Don't wait till then. Don't wait until you're standing in front of the court, so to speak, where God is going to judge you as to which way to go or not. But rather, do it now, before, when God is still to be found, when he is still close with you, before he's come to you in judgment, before he started to, God forbid, try to punish you. So the actual lesson of the verse is really almost not quite the opposite, but very different from what we thought it meant. It's telling us, so if that's the case, then what is so special about this time, right? We should have Rosh Hashanah all year round, right? What does it mean that God judges us every single day? So what I'm going to, if we continue to read those verses. In Isaiah, he answers that question. What I read to you is verse 55, chapter 55, verse 6. The next verse says in verse 7, Yazov Rasha Darko, an evil person should abandon his evil ways, and he should return to God via Shov Hashem, and then God will have mercy on him. These are reminiscent of the mood of the days of the Yom Noraim. And then God says, Kilo machshavotay machshavotechem, right? My thoughts are not like your thoughts. Below darchechem derachai. Your ways are not like my ways. In other words, you don't understand my ways. However, when we celebrate during the year on Pesach, for example, we celebrate a certain idea of chayot, an idea of freedom, right? Or the various themes of the days of Pesach. On the days of Shavuot, we think about Matan Torah, receiving the Torah, and all that means for us. Rosh Hashanah, does that mean that these are the only days when these values are important? Of course not. It's because human beings, we have a cycle of the year where we need to learn different lessons at different times. There isn't anything specific about this day, which all of a sudden magically we have a thing. But as people, because because people are not gods, we need certain times when we emphasize certain things. We can't do it all at once. So Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is a time where we have the opportunity to learn this lesson and carry it throughout the entire year. And that lesson is that God does judge us, but he's constantly judging us. And that there are consequences to our actions, and these consequences are all the time. So we therefore need to remember this lesson throughout the year. Today, when it's not Elul yet, tomorrow, on Tuesday, December 12th or whatever, every single day of the year, we need to take the lesson of Rosh Hashanah and Kippur and remind us that now is the time for us to be better. Don't wait until the judgment comes. Don't wait until the bad time comes, because that's what the Navi Yeshayahu was teaching us. Yeshua Hashem b'himatzo, we should search out God when he is to be found, not after the fact, not when it's too late. So that's an important concept I wanted to mention in the beginning, something to remind us that of the lessons we are supposed to learn from these days that are coming very soon. I wanted to mention another thing that's important. The concept of din. Where do we get this idea, right? that there is a din. So throughout the Torah, we find this idea where God tells us that there are consequences to our actions. That if most famous, we find it in Devarim, Parak 30, where it says, Re'ei natati lefanecha hayom, I'm putting them in front of you today, et hachayim v'et hatov, life and good, v'et hamavet v'et ra, and death and bad. Asher anochi mitzavcha hayom, I'm commanding you, and so on. And then it reads, in other words, if you listen to my words, like then you will live and you will multiply, and you will have blessing, and so on. But if you turn your heart away, and so on, then then you will not have lengthy days upon this land, and so on. You will be punished. So these are very basic. There's two very basic concepts that we carry with us into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And those are the concepts that, number one, God gave us a choice, which I just read in the Pasuk, Re'ei natati lefanecha, I gave it in front of you at the Chaim. It's your choice. You can go either way. And then there's a judgment upon it. God will then look at us and say, which path did they choose? And set out on that path. Now, where do we get the fact that this happens on Rosh Hashanah? Now, this is not as simple as you might think. We all assume that Rosh Hashanah is the day of the din because it's so ingrained in our minds, and it's in the machzor of Rosh Hashanah. It's replete with mentions of this being a Yom HaDin, day of judgment. It's not 100% clear where this even comes from. However, Rosh Hashanah, we do know, is the day of creation, right? And it's the day where God created the world. It's the beginning. Now, when we build something or create something and set it into the world to do whatever job it is that we created it to do, right? This is the time when we give the function, the task to whatever it is that we just built. If I build, a machine to accomplish a certain task, and I bring it into the factory and I flip it on, I expect that machine to do what it is that I built it for. So it makes sense that on the day of creation should also be the day of judgment, which we say, we said in Tehillim in verse chapter 33, verse 15, we mentioned Hayotzer Yachad Libam, God created the hearts of man all as one, Hamavin Okamasam, and then understands all of their doings. In other words, so the time of creation is also the time where God understands the job that he gave to us. So it makes sense that this job, that the judgment, are we doing that job, should take place on the day of creation. We have that chance. The tradition is that we have the chance during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to demonstrate that we are on the path that God set us on. And by Yom Kippur, by that time, if we have demonstrated that we're truly following the proper path, we can then assume that we have achieved a good judgment. However, like I was emphasizing in the beginning, the actual judgment of God is something that's constant, something all the time. These are meant to teach us these concepts and ideas and to carry it with us throughout the year. Now, once we have this established, now let's go and start talking about the laws of Yamu Noraim. Okay, so the first is I wanted to, I've been quoting from the prophets a little bit, from the Nevi'im. I want to mention to you a few things. One of the things that we do during this time is daven a lot. We go to shul a lot. We say a lot of selichot. We say a lot. There's all kinds of things that we pray. There's also a lot of fasting. We'll discuss in a minute some customs of fasting. We fast on Yom Kippur, of course. We also fast on Tzom Gedalia, the day after Rosh Hashanah. We fast. There was in the past the custom of fasting for 10 days, which would mean the 4 days before of Selichot, plus all of the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There was such a custom. There's another custom specifically to fast on the day of Rosh Hashanah. What is the point of all of this davening and fasting? So I wanted to give you a couple of quotes that I believe are really important for us to understand. And these are quotes that are repeated in many cases throughout the Machzor, and themes that pop up quite consistently. The first two are the two Nevi'im who teach us what fasting and prayer is actually about and what we're trying to accomplish when we do that. And then I'm going to read you from Yoel, who really goes into the deepest depths of what fasting and prayer is for and what we're trying to accomplish when we do those actions. So first, let's look at Yeshayahu, Parak Aleph, the beginning of Sefer Yeshayahu. I'm going to look at verses 15 and 6 through 17. So if we read verse 15, Yeshayahu tells us very clearly, when you raise your hands in prayer to me, I'm going to ignore you. I'm going to look away. Even if you pray to me a lot, God says, I'm not going to listen. Because your hands are full of blood. This blood is referring to oppression, one man against the other. So what God is saying is, if you turn to me in prayer, you can raise your voices and you can raise your arms in prayer as much as you want. But as long as your behavior doesn't reflect your prayer, I'm not listening. And he continues to say, Rachatzu hizaku. You need to wash your hands. You need to purify yourselves. Hasiru ro'am aleichem. You need to take away the evil ways that you have. Stop being bad. Then God will listen. God repeats the same lesson through another prophet, that is the prophet Zechariah. And I'm just going to read a little bit there. Zechariah chapter 7, verse 13, where Zechariah says a very interesting concept. And he also tells us a little bit about what this prayer is about. It says, Vayihi ka'asher karav lo shemeu. Just like when God called out to you and told you how to behave, but you didn't listen to him. Kain yikru, the same thing. If you call out to me, v'lo eshma, I will not listen to you. Amar Adonai Tzvaot, says God. And I will punish you. And then I could continue several verses, but I'm going to skip a little bit to Zechariah 8, and it's the same passages as he continues to discuss this topic. He ends by saying, however, what are the things you need to actually do in order to improve, in order for God to listen to your prayer? God makes it very clear. Dabru emet isha re'ehu, speak truth one man to the other. Emes, truth, umishpat shalom, and proper, peaceful justice. Shiftu b'sharechem. That's the kind of judgment that you should have in your society. Stop thinking about how to hurt and harm other people, and so on. That, God says, these are the things that I hate. So prayer without better behavior is useless. However, the flip side of that is when does prayer and fasting help? And I'm going to take a quick look at Yoel, the Navi Yoel, who really tells us and explains to us. Now, Navi Yoel was speaking in a time when there had been a huge disaster. There was a terrible, terrible famine because of a terrible a plague of locusts that had devoured all the food, and the people were starving. So Yoel, and a lot of these psukim might sound familiar to you from the tefillah, because he talks about blowing a shofar and why shofar is related. And after this, we'll understand why we blow the shofar and El, and we're going to get to the laws in just a minute. But with this background, all of the laws that we do will make a lot of sense. So what is Yoel? How does he explain to the people how to respond? Yoel tells us in chapter 2, Tiku shofar b'tzion. I need you, please, everyone, blow a shofar in Zion. Why? Because I need the entire land to shake and tremble. We need to wake them up. I'm going to skip a few verses and go to verse 12 in that chapter 2, where Yoel makes it very clear what's the purpose of blowing the shofar and waking people up. Because now says God, Shuvu adai b'chol levavchem. I want you to return to me with your entire heart. Uvitzon, and with fast, uvevichi, and with crying, uvemisped, and with speaking eulogies, speaking about what it is. So what Yoel is telling us here is very clear what the purpose of the fast is, right? The reason for this fast is in order to get us to wake up our hearts. And he continues, he says, V'kiru levavchem. I want you to tear your hearts, v'al bigdeichem. Don't tear your clothing. I'm not interested in seeing you tear your clothes. V'shuvu el Adonai. I want you to return to God. Kichanu v'rachamhu, erech apayim rav chesed. Yoel is clearly mentioning the Yud Gimel Midot, which we're going to speak about in just a minute, the 13 attributes of mercy of God, which we say over and over again during the season. Yoel is mentioning them here to say that the way we bring about those attributes is not by tearing our clothes, but by tearing our heart. Because of all of this, we therefore have the customs that we have. And what, if we keep in mind what Yeshayahu and what Zechariah and what Yoel and all of the Nevi'im reminded us over and over again, there is a purpose to fast. I just want to read Yoel verse 15 in the same chapter. He continues, Tiku shofar b'tzion. Blow the shofar in Zion. Kadishu tzom kiruat Torah. Now I want you to set aside, make special a day for fasting, a day where you stop doing work. So again, what he's telling us here, Isvu gather the nation together. Kachu call, you need to make the congregation holy. Kivsu zakanim, gather together the elderly. Isvu olalim, gather the young children, the young kishatayim and the babies. It's and so on and so forth. This idea that we all gather together on a fast day comes directly from the prophets and comes directly from Yoel, explaining to us how we bring about, by bringing together everyone, it inspires all of us to be better. For this reason, during these days that were designated as the days of Din, and the days where we're supposed to remind ourselves of the how important it is for us to behave better, and how important it is. So all of these customs were established. So Selichot, which is the first thing we're going to talk about in terms of laws, is one of the customs that developed over the centuries in order to help prepare us for these days. Selichot are a custom. Exactly when they started is unclear. Probably somewhere in the days of the Gaonim, or early days of Gaonim, was when the practice of Selichot started. And because it's a latter custom, by that time, we were already scattered in many places of the world. So there's really three main groups of customs. There's the Ashkenazic custom that most of us in this group are probably Ashkenazim that are familiar with. There's probably several Sephardim in this group too. And there's the Sephardic custom, which became very similar to the custom of most of the Jews of the Middle East, even if they weren't Sephardic. And then there's the Yemenite custom, which is also different. So the first thing that differs in the customs is when we start saying Salichot. So the Ashkenazic custom became the custom of saying Salichot for 4 days prior to Rosh Hashanah. And the reason for the 4 days is because I mentioned above that the custom became to fast for 10 days, that the corresponding to 10 days of Teshuvah, the 10 days of repentance. Now, the problem is that Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and there's definitely going to be Rosh Hashanah 2 days, Erev Yom Kippur, and there's going to be at least one Shabbat during those days, are 4 days where you are not allowed to fast because they're holidays. So in order to make up for those 4, the custom came to fast the 4 days prior to Rosh Hashanah, which became the days of Salichot. And that developed the Ashkenazic custom that many of us are probably familiar with. Now, where did Motzei Shabbat, the custom also began to read it on Motzei Shabbos, to start on the Saturday night.
So we have to fast 4 days in a row before Rosh Hashanah?
There was such a custom. Now
we don't do it anymore, right?
Yeah, there may be somebody, but it's very few people have this custom anymore.
Okay. I've never heard of that. I've never done that before.
Yeah, so. No, and neither have I. I heard of it, but I've never done it.
Yeah.
But that's where the custom developed, and
what was the point? What was the reason for that?
So there's the reason for the 4 days were to make up for the 4 days in the 10 that we're not allowed to fast.
Okay.
The other reason mentioned is the custom is mentioned in the Torah. The Torah mentions that we should separate the Korban Pesach for 4 days prior to Pesach, and to make sure that the korban is prepared and to make sure that it doesn't have any blemishes and that it's healthy. So and we ourselves are kind of like this sacrifice. We're like the korban. Obviously, we don't bring sacrifices today, but we need to think of ourselves as being given to the hands of God to decide our fate, which has some similarities to the concept of a korban. Now, so therefore, we ourselves give ourselves 4 days to check ourselves, to make sure we are free of sin, which the blemish on the animal somewhat could represent sin. So that's another origin of the custom of the Ashkenazi custom of 4 days. Now, the reason why it always starts on Saturday night is because on Shabbat, where more of us have been holy. We've spent a day with our families, spent a day with our communities. We've went to shul, we've davened, we've refrained from doing mundane activities. We've probably learned more Torah than we usually did. We went to some shiurim and everything. So because we want to start this process when we're on our best behavior. So Saturday night is an ideal time to start. So therefore, the custom began, at least among Ashkenazi Jews, to start this process of Salichot on a Motzei Shabbat. Now, because sometimes Rosh Hashanah falls out on earlier in the week where you can't get 4 days. So if Rosh Hashanah falls out prior to Wednesday, then we start the Salichot process the week before. So we end up with more than 4 days. And that became the Ashkenazic custom. The other thing that's also a custom is to read it is to say the Salichot when it's still nighttime. The reason stated among the poskim that the custom developed this way, and remember, all of this is pure custom. This is not a law. That's not written in the Talmud anywhere. But the custom developed because when you wake up early in the morning, things are quiet. We haven't yet been distracted by all of the mundane matters of our day. The businesses aren't open yet. We're not getting phone calls from our business colleagues about this, that, and the other thing. And it's the world around us is quiet, and it's an inspiring time. So saying Salichot before the sun rises, when it's still dark at the end of the night, became the custom because it's such a special time. Now, and also there's Kabbalistic reasons and basis for that as well. So however, nowadays, because we typically base our time on a clock rather than on the sun, so the custom started to change a little bit. Instead of doing it before the sun rises, people started to say Salichot a half hour earlier than they usually daven in the morning, because that just means they have to wake up earlier. So they still gain that advantage of the special quiet time, but it's not necessarily at nighttime. Other customs developed in much more recent times, which have been surrounded with a little bit of controversy. What if you just say it the night before, at like 10 o'clock the night before? So I'm not, and all of these things, because they're a matter of custom, whatever works, for you, for your community, and what people around you are doing is really the appropriate way to go about it. It's not like you're and some of the posts can even say, if you work hard all day and you're really, really exhausted, and you feel like if you wake up early for slichos, that your day's just not going to go well and you're not going to accomplish the things you need to, dropping slichos or just reading it maybe quickly to yourself, if that's inspiring, then is better than ruining your day. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
And then I remember when 9/11, a lot of Jews were saved because they went to slichos, and that's why they were starting like this conspiracy theories. How come the Jews didn't die in 9/11? A lot of them, because they were late that morning. And the plane struck right at around 9 o'clock, and
Wow.
they came late to work that day. I know some people who came late that day because of that.
Well, and anytime, very interesting. Thank you. So I'm not trying to I just to belittle the holiness of Salichot and the custom. It's a very important custom, and which is why we started the way we started. But just remember that it is a custom, and whichever format works the best for you would be the proper format for you to take. Some people have a problem with the night before, because in many times if you look carefully at the language of the Slichot, often it talks about the fact we woke up early, like Kamnu Biashmoret, we woke up, and it kind of seems like a lie if you're doing that at 10 p.m. Although it's not really a lie, because of another concept, which is really important. And I want to emphasize this now. And this could be a project as you go through the prayers of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that many of us walk into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur thinking about our personal issues, our personal, what we've done right, what we've done wrong, how can we improve, in order that we can have a better Gzar Din, that God can look upon us better, which is fine. But actually, when you read the prayers, there's virtually nothing written in a singular language. Virtually the entire prayer is about us as a community together, looking at ourselves, seeing how we can improve together, and how we are looking for a better year for the community within which we live. There's almost nothing, and there's a few exceptions to this rule, but there's virtually nothing in the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur liturgy that refers to our personal troubles and issues. And it's important to remember that. So therefore, when the language says Kamnu Biashmora, we woke up early, it's still we as a people, as a Jewish people, woke up early. So you're not lying if you say that, even if you didn't wake up early and you did it at 10 o'clock the night before. Another issue with the Salichot that's a common issue is, so we discussed the different customs as to when to say it. We discussed the Ashkenazic custom of when to start. Now, of course, I have to mention that both the Yemenite and the Sephardic custom is to begin Salichot at the beginning of Elul, with the whole month to say Salichot, and that is their custom. And therefore, there's no issue with the Saturday night before or anything like that. The Elul starts, and according to the Sephardic custom, they say Salichot the entire month before Rosh Hashanah. What if you can't get a minyan? So there's two parts of Salichot that require a minyan. The first part is obvious, and that's Kaddish. As usual, Kaddish, we know, we mentioned that Davar Shebekdusha, we talked about that with adding the word Elokeinu and Zimon, when we just learned Hilchot Zimon. But here, so Kaddish needs to have a minyan. So obviously, if you don't have a minyan, you can't say Kaddish. But there's another part that also requires a minyan, and that is the Yud Gimel Midot. When we read the 13 attributes of mercy of God, Hashem, Kel, Racham, Mochan, and those words also need to be said with a minyan. Now, why do they require a minyan? And the reason why it requires an understanding of what the Yud Gimel Midot is and what's the point of the Yud Gimel Midot. Now, I quoted from Yoel because I wanted you to understand the origin of this halacha. The origin of this halacha is really directly from Yoel, and that is Yoel explains to us what the Yud Gimel Midot is. It's very common, before I talk about Yoel again, is for people to quote the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara in Talmud in the Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Yud Zayin Amud Beis, talks about how God told Moshe Rabbeinu that the secret of forgiveness is the Yud Gimel Midot, is these 13 attributes. And if we stand and we say these 13 attributes, we will achieve forgiveness. But the actual explanation for that is what I read to you in Yoel, and that is that God is merciful. And God has these attributes of mercy. And the way to bring them about, the Seder, the thing that we're supposed to do to bring them about, is not just say these attributes of mercy, but appeal to them. And the way we appeal to them is by improving ourselves and making ourselves better people. It's like he said, Kiru levavchem bi'al bigdeichem. Those were Yoel, the prophet's words. We tear our hearts open, not just our clothing. And if we tear our hearts open, so the Yud Gimel Midot therefore represents, and again, the other concept that I mentioned, the concept of community, represents that special relationship between God and the community. God at that time, don't forget, this is really important. At that moment when God told Moshe the 13 Midos of mercy, was the time when God offered Moshe an out. He said, I'll kill the people and make just you, right? I'll make the people out of just you. I'll save you because you're the only righteous one. And Moshe didn't want that because he was asking God for mercy on the entire community. So when there is an issue relating, when we say something holy, it requires a community, because that's the point of the Yud Gimel Midot. That's why it requires a minyan. A minyan represents the entire community. Without a minyan, we can't accomplish that. If you're alone, that's just you yourself, and that misses the entire point of the Yud Gimel Midot and the entire point of the Slichos.
I thought a minyan was just 10 people.
It is 10 people, but a minyan is called an Ada, a community. It represents the people. Obviously, if we could get all Jews of the world together, that would be even better, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But a minyan represents all of the people. It represents the community. And
also, where did the custom of the idea of ripping our clothes come from?
Well, it's a custom that represents mourning, and it's and often when it was one of the parts of the custom in response to a tragedy in the community or in response to suffering, the people would fast and people would tear their clothing, which is why the Yoel chose that metaphor of tearing your heart and not your clothing. He says, tearing your clothing is only useful if it inspires you to tear your heart open. But if it doesn't, then it's just an action that's just destroying clothing for no reason. So now we have a couple other things about Selichot. So we talked about the time, we talked about a minyan. There's also the din of the question of whether or not you wear a talis. The general custom in Ashkenaz is not to wear a talis at nighttime, with the exception of Yom Kippur, and we'll get that when we talk about Yom Kippur. But however, in Ashkenaz, the custom by Ashkenazi Jews, the custom is that a chazan generally wears a talis even at night, because it's a beged of honor. It's showing honor, and the person leading the tefillos should be wearing something honorable. Now, the custom in Teiman, the custom of the Yemenite Jews, is that everyone wears a talis at night for slichot, period. not just the chazan. And the custom in Sfarad of Sephardic Jews is that no one wears a talis at night. So this again, because this is a different custom, it depends on what the origins are, and every congregation should do whatever it is that their general standard practice is. The question is, what a silichot remind us, of course, of tachanun, which we say every day, and we know that there are many days where we drop and don't say tachanun, such as if there's a chatan, if there's a bride or a groom present, or if there's a father of a baby who's going to have a brit that day. However, selichot, the custom is we say selichot even if there is a chatan present, because of the holiness of the day, it doesn't get pushed away, and the special quality of this day doesn't get pushed away. However, there are those that disagree with that. The general custom is to say selichot anyway. Some say, well, then if there is a chatan, tell him not to come, so that we can say selichot and not have to worry about this problem. But I just wanted to mention that as one of the different customs that are out there. I talked already about the custom of the 10 fasts. After the custom of the 10 fasts started falling by the wayside, in many communities, the custom of fasting on Erev Rosh Hashanah remained. So on Erev Rosh Hashanah, and it was relatively recent when you look through the Svarim that people stopped fasting on Erev Rosh Hashanah. We're probably looking at the last 150, 200 years when it became less and less prevalent, to the point where nowadays I don't know of many people that actually fast on Erev Rosh Hashanah. I have come across some people that fast until Chatzos, in other words, half a day on Erev Rosh Hashanah. But as a remnant of that, related to that, we do have a lot of extra slichot, a lot of extra prayers, which are kind of went hand in hand with the fact that was a day upon which a lot of people were actually fasting. Now, even though we say the extra slichot on Erev Rosh Hashanah, there is no tachanun because it's the day before the holiday and it's considered a day where we don't say tachanun.
What about the tzitzits? Do you have to wear the tzitzits at night also, or no?
Well, we're gonna hopefully one day learn the laws of tzitzis together very well.
Okay.
However, the general idea is that if it's a cloak or a garment that you usually wear in the daytime and you're wearing it at nighttime, you're supposed to have tzitzis on it.
Okay.
But if it's a cloak or a garment that you wear at nighttime specifically, then even if then you don't need tzitzis on it. That's the rule. But we'll do hopefully one day the laws of tzitzis. So wearing a talus at night.
Like he said, talus. Like he said,
yes.
Most people don't have to wear a talus at night, but they would have to wear tzitzis at night.
Yes, and if you do wear the talus in shul at night by slichot, it has to have tzitzis on it, even though it's nighttime, because it is a garment that you generally wear at day. And that would be true according to any custom. So the talus has to have kosher tzitzis on it, even if it's nighttime. The laws of the tekiyat shofar goes hand in hand with the customs that we've been mentioning. We start blowing shofar in Elul every day. It's also a custom that developed. And the reason for that custom is, as we saw in Yoel and we saw in other places, is blowing the shofar wakes us up, reminds us to do teshuvah, and it was an inherent part of almost every fast that's been declared by our people over the millennia. Blowing a shofar is designed to wake us up. There are many places that have the custom to blow if a fast is declared for other reasons, such as a drought or something like that. So we blow the shofar every day on Elul, but the custom also developed not to blow it on Erev Rosh Hashanah. Many of us are familiar with the idea that we don't blow it on the day before Rosh Hashanah because we want to confuse the Satan, which because he was listening to the shofar every day, and all of a sudden we stopped. But the real reason for it, which is given by most of the earlier poskim, is that because we've been blowing it every day as a minhag, as a custom, and tomorrow we're going to be blowing the shofar as a chova, as an obligation. By not blowing for one day, we remind people that there's a difference between the two. That before it was custom, but tomorrow it's minhag. So there's various customs as to whether or not, if you're the Baltukea and you want to practice on Erev Yom Tov, you want to practice your skills. Some say you shouldn't practice. The general custom is to allow for practicing on that day. Maybe do it in a room somewhere where not too many people listen, so they don't think you're actually blowing the shofar. but the general the halacha is considered, it's okay to practice. Other customs that we have to prepare is to go to the mikvah on Erev Rosh Hashanah. Again, that's part of Lifnei Hashem Titaro. We want to purify ourselves before we go in front of God, in front of the true judge, and going to the mikvah is part of that process. That's an important custom as well. There's a lot of literature in the halachic literature. So I'm mentioning these things because these are the things that the halachic literature discuss about Erev Rosh Hashanah, preparing for an Elul and Erev Rosh Hashanah. So one of them is choosing a chazan, choosing a leader. So the qualifications for what makes an appropriate chazan, an appropriate bal tefillah to lead the tefillos for Yomim Noraim, come from the general factors that the Chazal that talked about, that the Gemara talks about. But remember that in the time of the Gemara, those were usually referring to all the time, not just Yom Noraim. And it was at a time when the person that led the tefillot, and the people didn't have a siddur, so they would actually be being motzi. The people were listening to every word they said, so they were doing the mitzvah for everyone. On the Yom Noraim today, especially, everyone has the machzer. Most people have some way of following along and saying the words themselves. However, because it's the Yom Noraim, we want to make special care. So someone who's well-liked, someone who's humble, someone who gets along with others, these are all qualities of how to choose the proper person. And also, most importantly, though, the factor that comes out is someone who can lead everyone in a way that the people will enjoy and be inspired by the tefillah. So someone who can speak the words clearly, who can sing it with a nice tune, who can lead in a way that's loved by the people. And that's really the crucial thing. One of the points, this has probably been a source of way too many machlokot, way too many arguments in synagogues and congregations over the century, is who's supposed to daven on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. This is, and the poskim emphasize over and over and over again, but unfortunately, I have a feeling that people will never get this message. And that is that if you have a problem with the person who's leading, and by bringing up your problem, you're going to cause fights, whatever problem it is that you have is way less important than not causing fights. So it's much more important to keep your mouth shut and allow whoever it is to daven so that there's no fights and machlok and arguments, then whatever it is that you find is important enough to bring up. So the post can bring this over and over and over again, that the bottom line is peace. What God really wants, and we saw that from the psukim that I raised before in Yeshayahu, and the key thing is don't be thinking, remember I read the words of Zechariah, if you recall, who says this really beautifully, V'ish et ro'at re'ehu, and each person should stop thinking about the bad things about his friend. Al tachshavu b'levavchem, stop thinking these things in your hearts. So if Rosh Hashanah leads to fights over why this guy is no good and why that guy is no good, then you're missing the entire point of Rosh Hashanah. There's another thing about standing and sitting. We stand a lot, we sit a lot. There's various customs as to whether to stand during Selichot or sit. The Ashkenazi custom is generally to stand. The Taimani custom, the Yemenite custom is generally to sit throughout the entire time. And the Sephardic custom is generally to stand for certain parts, like the Yud Gimel Midos, and sit for other parts. We also have, there's a lot of literature in the halachic literature about whether or not you need to stand when they open the Aron Kodesh. It's in many machzorim, it says that when they open the Aron Kodesh, people should stand. It is a custom, however, the law is that it depends on if the Torah is in its own place and it's in an honorable place, meaning it's in the Aron Kodesh or it is on the bima. So it's in the place that's designated for the Torah. The law is that there is no requirement to stand. So this is something to remember for the entire year. One doesn't need to stand during laning because the Torah is in its honored place, which is on the bima being read. Now, even when one opens their own Kodesh, there is no din that you have to stand because the Torah is set in its place. However, when the Torah is being carried through the congregation, then the law is just like one must stand for a Talmud Chacham, for an honorable person, one must certainly stand for a Torah. So as the Torah is being carried around the shul through the congregation, then there is a requirement to stand. So, however, despite that being the rule, the custom still develops for people to stand when the Aron Kodesh is open. But I just want to point out that that is a custom, but not a law. So therefore, in cases where you feel weak, maybe it's Yom Kippur and you don't have strength, or if someone is older and it's hard for him or her, or any other reason, that they don't think that standing when the Aron Kodesh is open is something that you have to suffer to do. If it's really uncomfortable for you, then you can still remain seated and you'll still be fulfilling the letter of the law. So these are some of the rules that the post can talk about in preparation for the, I don't know if I mentioned Hatarat Nidarim. There is a custom for us to repeal the vows that we may have made during the year. That custom is also on Erev Rosh Hashanah, the day before Rosh Hashanah. Something to keep in mind. The actual laws of repealing vows is a very complicated subject. Maybe one day we'll study those together too. The reason for doing it before Rosh Hashanah is, again, by taking these obligations away, we can present a much cleaner slate in front of God, that we're fulfilling our obligations. By taking away the obligations that we may not be able to fulfill or may find difficult to fulfill. That's why that custom, there's no specific reason why Hatarat Nidarim has to be done in Erev Rosh Hashanah, but that's why the custom developed to do it on that particular day. Are there any comments or questions about this? Because what we're going to do next time is we're going to dive into Rosh Hashanah itself. But before that, I hope this has give us some background on the preparation period beforehand. Any comments or questions?
So mitzvah means commandment, and minhag means custom.
That is exactly correct. Yes, that's perfect.
All right, thanks.
Well said.
And
yes.
Will you be here? Will you be here next week for the next class?
Yes, next week, and we will hopefully dive into Rosh Hashanah next week. Yes, maybe we'll get somewhere into the middle of the laws of Yom Kippur. I doubt will cover. There's a lot to cover, and then Sukkot is a ton of laws to cover. But all right, any other comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
Earlier you mentioned about the custom of fasting 10 days, 4 days for the Ashkenazic custom. That before Rosh Hashanah?
So the custom is to do 10 days. Technically, it should be between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But because if Rosh Hashanah being the first day of the year, Yom Kippur being the 10th day, of those 10 days, 4 of them, you're not allowed to fast, right? 2 of Rosh Hashanah, 1 Yom Kippur, and 1 of Shabbos. So therefore, people tack on 4 days before Rosh Hashanah in order to fulfill the full 10.
These were just fasting during the daytime hours, not
just daytime hours. Yeah, not 3 days in a row, but they would fast the day and then eat at night. Yeah.
Okay.
Two comments, Shaul.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So the first is regarding those 4 days. I thought it was interesting the parallel that you made with Pesach, and what was interesting to me is in Chumash, in Torah, it says that on the 10th you shall gather the lamb, on the 14th you shall slay it, on the 15th you shall eat it. Right. So the 4 days is a parallel to that starting point of the Pesach.
Wait, say it again. I'm sorry.
So if I understood what I think I heard you say was that there was a parallel between the 4 days of fast and the 4 days before Pesach.
Yes.
And what
yes, go ahead.
Sorry. And so what I was saying is that if I remember my Torah, it says on the 10th you shall gather, on the 14th you shall shecht, and on the 15th you shall cook and eat.
Yes.
right? So the
Right.
4 days that you were talking about is directly parallels that 4-day period
Yeah.
between the 10th and the 14th.
Yeah, that would be
Is
make for an interesting sermon. The parallel between the 4 days before Pesach and the 4 days before Rosh Hashanah. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is, and I had, you had said that Rosh Hashanah was the creation, the anniversary of the creation of the world. And as I understood it, as I've learned before, it's the anniversary of the completion of the creation of the world, which was the creation of humans, which is why who are imbued with the responsibility for.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Yeah. But it was the point being that God created us on Rosh Hashanah, and then therefore, that now is the time of judgment, and that was the parallel between, you make something, you set it on its mission when you make it, and that's the time to assess whether or not it's doing its job. But what any other, but thank you for bringing that up.
Just the
And
Hasidic
also,
explanation is that you don't. Oh, sorry, Ben.
I'm sorry. Sure.
Yes.
I also wanted to ask you, when you were talking last week and all the other weeks prior to today, when today you started a new topic, when you started talking about Rosh Hashanah, before that you were talking about blessings, making a blessing for this and for that.
Right.
So my question is, what I know it may not seem important now compared to, but it's just something I'm wondering about. What is the blessing you would say for eating candy, like for gummy bears, for example? What would the blessing be for that? Because I was just eating gummy bears tonight before the class. I wasn't sure what to say.
Yeah, the blessing is shehakol nihiyeh b'dvaro.
All right.
On those candies.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Someone else was about to say something.
Yeah, he was the rabbi. I forgot his name, but it can't. I studied with him last night. Yeah.
I was just going to add that the Hasidic explanation is that there's no king without a people, so that's why we start counting the year on Rosh Hashanah, because that's when man was created, like the previous person spoke. So.
Very good.
I'm sorry I forgot your name.
Yosef.
Yosef, thank you. I'm sorry I forgot. Yeah.
No, it's really okay, Ben. It's past my bedtime.
It's okay.
I'm an hour ahead. So
any other questions, comments? If not, then
Shkoyach.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Well, looking forward to learning about Rosh Hashanah next week together. Be
Thank
well.
you very much.
We've got what, eight days till Elul at this point?
Sounds about right.
8, 9 days. It's coming. Shakaya.
Good night, Shul.
So
Good night, everybody.
Good night.